Hello, Amplify You family. Michelle Abraham here, your host. I am bringing you a super awesome, amazing, another awesome guest. And I just wanted to bring this guest on for you today. I met him a few months ago before this whole COVID lockdown happened. And we had a great time at the New Media Summit together. And I just thought that his personality and his experience and everything's just perfect match for our podcast today. So I would like to introduce you to James Robilotta. And James is the new host of Diner Talks podcast, as well as he's a professional speaker and an amazing guy all around. So James, welcome to our show.
What's going on, Michelle? Good to see you.
Thanks, James. Nice to see you too. Now
Indeed.
You have like the perfect radio voice and like, radio style going on over there with your purple microphone.
We try to stay cute over here. You know what I mean? So yeah, I appreciate it. I haven't seen you since we went out to dinner that night in San Diego, and boy has life changed.
Yes, it has. It was like 2 days after we all were out for this lovely dinner together, getting to know each other at a conference, then to like being locked in our houses for the next 3 months.
Yeah.
So holy smokes. Now you're a professional speaker, so your life extremely changed, especially your work life. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've gone through the last few months?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my business went ahead and ran into a wall. So yeah, I mean, I make my living getting on planes and traveling to places around the world and talking to people about authenticity and vulnerability and the role it plays both in leadership and in life. And so I have been effectively grounded and making the pivot to. Making the pivot. Every time we say pivot, I think we should drink. I think it should be a drinking game we play.
Drinking game.
Every time we say unprecedented or pivot. But I think, so it's been interesting to make that pivot to the virtual world. And I've been doing some virtual programming, but it's a lot harder. Right now, I love that I'm looking at you and I can hear you. You're not muted. And when I make a joke, I actually get to hear your laughter instead of this like uncomfortable silence. And yeah, virtual programming has been a fascinating test for my self-esteem, but it's also been a really cool way to reach a whole bunch more people.
Yeah, I bet it's going to be super awkward as like someone who usually gets like that feed from the audience and like the interaction with the audience to be like, nothing there.
Hello.
Wow. So it's like, are you doing jumping jacks before you get on a call then to keep your own energy up?
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yeah. Doing a couple quick laps. I think it. I mean, well, fortunately, I care. Yeah, fortunately, I care about what I'm talking about. And so that is important. So that enables me to really show up and bring the energy. I'm also not I'm not a boring guy. I kind of bring the energy no matter where I am. It's a little obnoxious to some people, but that helps too.
And you're super fun and memorable, so I think that helps too.
Thank you, friend.
So we were laughing about this last time we chatted, is that, I saw someone else post in a Facebook group like, James is the best podcast guest I've ever had on my show. And so I think you're meant for this, James. So you just started your own podcast. Tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
I did, yeah. So it's called Diner Talks. We're in the middle of doing some recording right now. We're going to launch it soon, and that's really exciting. But it's called Diner Talks with James, and I think some of the best conversations that we have in our lives occur late at night with friends who we're excited to be with, but meals that we're not supposed to be eating. And right, like those late night pancakes or tacos.
Chinese restaurant or something.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, for sure. But those conversations are memorable. I mean, they're usually vulnerable. They're also usually hysterical. I just love the conversations. Everybody kind of lets their guards down because they feel safe, and they're also a little delirious because they're tired. And so that's what I'm trying to emulate with the podcast. I want listeners to feel like they're eavesdropping on two cool friends having a deep conversation and laughing. and the diner booth next to them.
Awesome. So now are you like, going out drinking first and then recording this like 3 a.m. ish with like a bowl of chili or something?
Yeah. I mandate everybody to go clubbing before and show up to the recording sweaty. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're doing it as a Facebook Live also. We do Facebook and YouTube Live. And so that's an interesting component to it as well. So trying to kind of hit multiple platforms as well, and then rip that audio for a podcast.
Yeah. And then, so are you like, it's great about Facebook Lives and things is that you can interact with the audience and stuff. Are you kind of stopping that at a certain point and not interacting with the audience so that you get a nice clean podcast cut? Or how are you orchestrating that while managing both of those platforms?
Yeah, I'd give myself an A- on that. I think there are definitely some times where a comment comes in that is very poignant, or is funny, or something like that, and so I'll sometimes be like, yeah, that's right, Johnny, good comment there, or that's so interesting that you brought that up, and so I'm doing a little bit of that, but I would say 90 to 95% of the time, it's just the guest and I. So I'm hoping that I'm not doing it a distracting amount of time. And then a lot of the interaction also, I'm doing a Q&A at the end with every guest. But I've always said, even on the Facebook Live, I'll look into the camera and say, hey, thanks so much for those of you who listen to the podcast. Really appreciate you tuning in. If you want to hear the Q&A with my guest, feel free to find it on my YouTube channel and tune in there. Thanks so much. Take care. And then I jump into the Q&A with the guest, and that all gets posted to the YouTube channel. So I'm trying to mitigate that, but it's something I'm also learning.
Yeah, that's a great strategy actually, to then like record like a behind the scenes kind of thing that's on another platform for them to go and, hey, subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out like that behind the scenes part over there too. I think that's a really good strategy. Very
Yeah,
cool.
I'd be curious to hear from your perspective. I mean, how it would be obnoxious for a podcast listener to constantly be hearing people reading comments and telling people to comment and whatnot. But where is that balance, do you think? Do you think it should be literally none, or what do you think?
Yeah, we kind of go, that's wait a second, who's interviewing who here? No, I'm just kidding. We kind of have that balance. Yeah, it's a tricky balance. So kind of some of the things we suggest to do is like, have those like back and forth conversations at the beginning with people and at the end with them. But then try to get a clean cut for the middle, or as much as possible clean cut, because what happens is when you post it on iTunes and stuff, your listeners are like, oh, I feel like I'm missing out on the conversation. I don't know who they're talking about, or like what where, like they'll be looking on their phone for comments, like so yeah, I don't think anyone's perfect, but I think if you wanted to try to keep it as clean as possible, to do it that way. But like you said, when you get a great comment in the middle of something, you want to bring that into the comment into the show in the moment, I think that's okay too. I think as long as your podcast listeners understand that this is recorded live, and that if they really don't want to miss out, they should come to the live recording of it.
Yeah.
I think that's all right too. So who are your guests? Are they friends? Are they colleagues? Are they people you've dragged there after drinking?
Yeah. 100% of my guests are unwilling participants. No, I think, my guests right now, it's interesting. I made a note on my phone of basically like guests in the beginning. It's almost like applying to university, to a college, where it's like I got my local schools, and then I got my schools that I'm pretty sure I can get into, and then I got my reach schools. And so that's kind of what I've done. And right now I'm still in the beginning, where I'm interviewing good friends that I know have cool stories and cool perspectives. But they're across the board. We've talked about the most recent episode that I did was around what's happening in the world right now, and the murder of George Floyd, and we had a really powerful conversation around what is it like to parent, especially what is it like as a Black man to parent right now, and also what can you teach or suggest to white parents for how they can have powerful conversations. And we talked a lot about that, and that was probably I would say the most pointed the conversation has ever been, where we really kind of stuck on that topic, blackness, whiteness. But the ones prior to that, were friends of mine that are great storytellers. And we talked about, when did you decide to pivot from this to this? You left a major job and went here. How was that? What is it like for you? Another buddy of mine is a father to 3 daughters. And we all know that the past 3 years have been a really critical time for men to show up. And so what is it like for you being a man, parenting 3 daughters? Does that change, and talking a little bit about that? So the goal is to have deep conversations with people that we also laugh throughout.
Awesome. Yeah, this sounds like really powerful conversations too. I love that. Not just another, random conversation.
How you doing, Rick?
Sometimes those podcast conversations go a little haywire for some shows, but I love that you're mixing a little bit of comedy and with seriousness and current events, and like being willing to have some of those tough conversations that are out there too. It sounds like it's really powerful. Looking forward to listening to more of what you've got coming on down the pipeline.
Thanks, friend.
So a couple of questions about, I think our listeners are podcasters thinking about podcasting. I think there's some really interesting things about your background too that I'd love to chat with you about. Well, how did you become a professional speaker? Because I think as podcasters, we start speaking and we're like, this is great. This is fun. I think I might want to go on stages too. So what's that like for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's first off, what it's like for me is a rush. I love it. There's some people who jump out of planes. I get on stages and try to move people. That's what I try to do. And so, yeah, I've been afforded a really cool opportunity. And how I got started with that was, in college, I majored in marine biology. Around my junior year, my teachers told me I was putting too many jokes in my scientific papers. And I was like, you're probably right. And so I was like, maybe this isn't for me. Went in and got a master's in counseling, and realized that I love developing leaders. And so, and having conversations with people. And so, but then I was at a conference that I happened to be attending, but they had also had a call for programs. And I was like, well, I'll put a program in there just for fun. Why not share knowledge that I have, or in a creative way? And somebody came up to me after one of these conferences that I presented at, and where I was not being paid. I was just, like I said, there as an attendee and there to learn and share. But somebody came up to me in one of those conversations and asked me, they said, James, how much do you charge? And I looked them back in the face, Michelle, and I said, I'm very sorry. I don't know who the hell you're talking to. Because I didn't think I had something that people would pay for, right? I'm some white boy who was born with more than enough. And I haven't started from the bottom. Now I'm here. I haven't really been through a lot of struggle. I didn't hurt friends in a drunk driving accident. I haven't served in the military or any of those kind of things. I didn't have some crazy story. But it turns out that the way that I told the stories I had made them more relatable to people, because the fact that my stories were a little bit more grounded helped. And a lot of times we're afraid of putting ourselves out there because we don't think we have something that's crazy innovative or crazy new, or dramatic or influential enough, when in fact our stories are influential enough. Amazing. So that's what got me started.
And adding a little bit of the comedy and the improv into it, and the storytelling, was that a craft that you I think it comes naturally probably to you, but did you also work on learning how to storytell?
Yeah, for sure. I think, my parents would tell you I was born with a microphone in my hand, and they're probably right. They would know. I don't remember that moment. But I think, comedy has been something that I've always enjoyed. For me, the reason why I use humor is because when I make you laugh, I lower your walls. And as soon as your walls are lowered and you feel a little bit more comfortable, you sit back in your chair like, okay, this guy's got us. Then I can sucker punch you in the feels, right? Just at that moment where you're a little bit more vulnerable, oh, here comes the lesson. And so I love that opportunity. One thing that's helped me out a ton is I have done some training, and I recommend anybody who's interested. I recommend it to podcasters. I recommend recommend it to lawyers. I recommend it to
Mhm.
anybody who's in front of individuals. But improv comedy training is really powerful tool. It's a really powerful tool, and it makes you better. It makes you better. It makes you a better conversationalist. Even with
Mhm.
my friends, I know I'm a better listener. I know that I'm more empathetic. I also know that I add to their stories. I'm a better active listener. And But then also when I'm on stage, when things go off, I use those instead of have those shut down, right?
Right.
Like, 'cause a lot of people are like, things aren't going right. This is not the script. Instead,
Yeah.
improv teaches you to roll with the punches, and things that would have been emergencies before now become opportunities. And
Mm,
so that's that. And I've done a bunch of improv training and would
mhm.
recommend that highly.
That's awesome. I love that. And not something I ever thought of like for podcasters, but you're right. That'd be so fun, like so fantastic, so that you can go a little bit off script. And I remember like the first few podcasts, like you're talking about like so many questions I want to ask. Like I just want to stick on the script and like I don't even hear what you're saying because I'm like looking at my questions and like, well, what's the next question, right? And
Yes.
I've told this story many times before, but Steve Olsher was like the worst interview I ever did because he was so conditioned with his like 30-second media bites of answers that when I was interviewing him, I don't even think I heard what he said. I was just focused on what the next question was. So how great
Oh
is that to
yeah.
be able to like relax and like be able to joke around and go with things that happen in the room? Because you always in those live events, you've got something happening in the audience or some guy who's like, whatever, dude, you're not, your story sucks or
The
whatever.
hecklers.
Yeah, if you can like play with the hecklers, like, oh my gosh, that must make such a memorable presentation, I'm sure. So now, do you get rebooked by some of the same people over and over again in your talks?
I do, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, there's some companies that I work with that really value the way that I teach, and
Mhm.
so then they ask me, "Could you teach this?" And it's not like, "Can you come in and talk about accounting, and then come in and talk about nursing, and then come in and talk," right? Like, it's
Yeah.
never that far off. But it's like the idea of leadership has so many branches,
Right.
and are you able to talk about better team building? Are you able to talk about how to have better conversations, networking? Can you talk about sales? Can you talk about diversity and inclusion? Can you
Mhm.
talk about all that kind of supervision styles? Like,
Mhm.
all of that comes from a very similar tree.
Right.
So yeah, so there are some people that bring me in. There's other people that I do a lot of speaking at universities as well,
Mhm.
and those students don't change. So
Right.
sometimes I'll get brought in on like a 4-year cycle as opposed to a
Yeah.
yearly cycle.
Right. That's interesting. And so when they ask you to speak to do a topic that's maybe not in your normal speech that do you just whip that off, or you have so many different speeches now that you can choose from and kind of pull them all together to do that? It's fascinating to me, and like how you can switch from topic to topic with when you're asked to do that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that when you jump in to it, you realize how not far apart some of these things are,
Hmm.
right? I mean, and it's very interesting. And especially with what I talk about primarily, it comes from a place of authentic leadership,
Hmm.
authenticity, recognizing your patterns, and things like that. And how can you change your patterns? How do we shift them? You can apply that logic to everything, right?
Hmm.
Meeting somebody new, a new sales client, getting a new hire, having a new boss, right? Like, I mean, it's interesting how much of that correlates. So it's like, I would say that I have a bunch of messages that I've said that I can now apply with a
Hmm.
slightly different story to fit a situation.
That's
Um,
great.
so yeah, so it's almost like one way to look at it, it's like it's almost like a lake with a bunch of different beaches around it, but ultimately they all lead into the same lake of leadership
Right.
and of humanity. And so yeah, so that's kind of what I tend to do. But I also enjoy coming up and creating. I would say there's some topics where it's like, I'm not your guy for that. I just don't have the depth and the experience and whatnot. And so I don't hesitate to tell people. I literally say, like, listen, if you want me to bullshit about that, I got you. Like, if you just like me and you want to pay me, like, cool, I'll take your money. But if you truly want an expert on that, let me introduce you to so and so, who that's what they're laser pointed at.
Right.
So yeah, I try not to shy away from that as well, because I don't want to get paid to do things when I know that there could be somebody else who really could serve in a better way than I do.
That's awesome. You've had some big clients like American Express and General Electric, Yale University, Ohio State University. So now those are pretty big clients. They saw you speaking somewhere else and invited you to come speak, or did you reach out to them?
Multiple different things for different clients.
Mhm.
American Express, I had an individual there, a buddy of mine worked there, read my book, called me and said, "Hey, I read your book and I actually liked it." I was like, "Cool, thanks,
I
bro."
actually
Um,
liked it.
like he's like, "I just bought it to support you," but then like I got into it, I was like, "Oh shoot, this is good." And so he's like, "I want to give it to my boss's boss." And I had already know how far my buddy was up in the ladder, and I said, why don't I send a personalized copy to you to give to your boss's boss?
Mm.
And so that's kind of how I got in there. And then that individual who brought me in loved the book and said, "I need you to come speak to my people and I want to buy 300 books."
Mm.
And I don't even have 300 people that are going to be in the audience. I just want to put your book at random places around the American Express Tower in New York City, and I want to help you get your message out there. And I was like,
Wow,
who
great.
are you?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's other thing like the GE happened because somebody saw me speak at a conference
Mhm.
and said, "Hey, I think your message would be really applicable." And yeah, so some of those I had a friend who worked at Yale,
Mhm.
so yeah, and I've also I've had the opportunity. It's interesting. I've only spoken in Ontario, but I've done a lot of speaking around Ontario, but I haven't convinced another province to bring me in yet. But we're going to work on
Well, I'll work on BC for you. I think that would be good.
it.
It's interesting. It's interesting how, it all comes back to relationships, right? It's like same with podcasts and guests. Like it's all
Yeah.
like, who have you built those relationships with? And then, people have heard you on another show or they've met you somewhere, and everything just always comes back to relationships. I always find that fascinating when I ask people, how did you get this client, or how did this client hear about you? And then oftentimes it's not us like doing the cold calling and trying to get
Yeah.
booked on stages, right? It's all about the relationships. So your book is called Leading Imperfectly. I'd love to dive into that a little bit. So tell us a little bit about that book, where it came from, how you wrote that one.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The book is called Leading Imperfectly, The Value of Authenticity for Leaders, Professionals, and Human Beings. And I got into that because honestly, because of a reverse role model that I had. I had a supervisor who I don't believe got it. I don't believe was in her role for the right reasons, and that was shown as to how approachable she was not, and in the way that she kind of. What she sold us in the interview versus what she gave us once she got the job were two very different things. And that was really frustrating to see. And I realized that one of the things that she was lacking was authenticity and vulnerability. She never admitted when she was wrong. Something was always somebody else's fault. She passed the responsibility. This may sound like our president. You understand, like so. But so, but she just was not an authentic leader, right? She didn't show up, and and I recognize that that's a really important trait because when people can see themselves in you, they believe that they can. And
Mm-hmm.
so the power of relatability is crucial. And so that's what the book is around. The book is around increasing your relatability through storytelling. Like when you're giving feedback, telling a story, don't just come at somebody like, you do this wrong, you do this wrong. It's like, hey, I've been there. I've messed up. I dropped the ball. I let people down. And here's the impact that it had for me. Let me share that with you as I give you some feedback to try to shorten your learning curve. So things like that are really a lot of the concepts that are in the book. It's a lot of leading from your story. So
Mm-hmm.
many of us do not believe that we are enough. We're not
Mm-hmm.
cool enough, funny enough, smart enough, hot enough, successful enough, rich enough, whatever enough. And so we lead inauthentically. We lead from a place of they probably meant to hire somebody else that's like this. So let me pretend to be like that instead. No, they hired you not because you were the most perfect, but because you were the most trusted. And so those are kind of some of the concepts that I try to get through to the readers.
I love that. And those are so valuable concepts for like, us as leaders, as like podcast hosts too. We are putting ourselves out there as the host, but it's really important to not be that polished, perfect figure, that's not what
Yeah.
people are looking for. They're looking for someone to be relatable. And if I turn it into podcasting again, like when people come and like want us to edit out every and ah in their show, I'm like, heck no, like your audience needs to
Nope.
hear all those things and they're going to relate better to you as a person and as a host and your story. If you can share some of your story, share some of your imperfectness, with everything that you do. And I think as a leader, that's hard to do, but I think it's important to do, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the things that I've loved the most actually from the podcast is that I sometimes have to catch myself because when I actually I had a podcast that I almost put out like 4 years ago. I recorded 8 episodes and I convinced myself it wasn't good enough. Don't publish it. No one's going to like it. Then I shut it down, and that's sad. And but again, to what I was just talking about, I fell victim to it. And but I did exactly what you were talking about earlier, Michelle, where it's like I had this script of questions and like there was no me in it. It was just
Yeah.
like a straight interview, and that just didn't feel right. Even if the answers to their questions were good, and so in this new reincarnation of it, because there are some things that overlap. I have taken myself to be both a host and a student on my
Mm.
podcasts of like, I'm excited to learn. Like the one that I did last night, there were times where I was like, oh shoot, I got to think of another question here. And cause I was just so in what they were saying and
Yeah.
I was like taking notes. I've loved that about this experience.
Yeah, I love that too. I mean, my first, same thing. Like I hesitated on putting on a podcast for so long. I couldn't figure out what I wanted to talk about. One, and then two, I was like, I'm like, no one's really gonna listen. It's all good, you know. And then
Yeah.
I figured out that I wanted to learn about RVing. So I actually
Okay.
interviewed my husband and my kids and I. We bought an RV and went RVing for 5 months down through California and Nevada uh, and it was in Arizona. It was amazing. But we didn't know
That's
anything about
awesome.
RVing. So I set out to interview 25 RVing experts, which turned into like a virtual summit and then it turned into a podcast. And I was like, oh, this is so great. I'm like learning so much. I wanted to take notes as I was like, I think being the student, and then being able to like interview someone like as a student is so cool. Like, cause you get to learn, that's one of the benefits of being a podcast host, right? We
Yeah.
get to learn so much.
And we have, as the host, we have the power.
Mhm.
But the classic Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. But like, as a host, I think it's also important to be humble. We see a lot of people who grab the microphone and their egos are what
Mm,
people then wind up listening to,
mhm.
not their humanity, because they're afraid to show some of that. And I know the podcasts that I love the most are not that. I
Yeah.
feel like there's a fellow human being on the other side of the recording.
Yeah, exactly. Those, and we don't need more ego. We don't need to be listening to more ego. We got enough of that everywhere else, right?
Accurate.
More human is much better. Well, that's so awesome, James. Where can we find more information about you? How can we work with you, buy your book, all that kind of stuff? Take us there.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I'm James T. Robo on all social media. James T. Robo on like Instagram or Facebook.com/ James T.
Is that
Robo.
your superhero
Um,
name?
that's
James T.
it, baby.
Bobo?
That's it. And that's yep. And so yeah, James T. Robo. My website is also jamestrobo.com. I've been hosting a bunch of virtual summits lately to help people get out of their own way. And when people just feel like they're in a cycle of patterns. And so those are called Living Imperfectly Live, and all that information is
Love it.
available on there. And eventually the Diner Talks will be up there as well. But as of right
Yeah.
now, Diner Talks lives on that Facebook page. Facebook.com/James T. Robo.
Awesome. Well, thank you, James, for shedding your light, your humor, and your amazing personality with us today. It's been awesome. And I look forward to having you back again. We can talk about Diner Talks once it's been out for a while too, and how that experience has been for you. So we'll have you back again soon. And until next time, just keep being awesome. And I look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you, friend. It was so special being a part of it. Thanks for inviting me into your community.
You're welcome. Amplify you guys. See you next week. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, be awesome.